So let me give you a brief introduction to the Gospel according to John before we go into the chapters or the parts of the chapters. The first thing you got to notice is it's important for you to learn how to name the things in the Bible correctly. So this is not the Gospel of John. It's the Gospel of Jesus according to John. It's very important that you notice this subtle difference because we're not telling John's story. We're telling Jesus' story according to the author here. So the first thing I want to tell you that might blow your mind, and I don't want you to dwell too long on this, but our Bible says the Gospel according to John. But if you read the text carefully, you won't find the name John inside the Gospel. You won't find the reference to an author. Actually, the author writes it in a way that he or she kind of hides his or her identity. You know, like we're going to go with John because this is the traditional take. And I study a lot of theology. I study a lot of philosophy. I study a lot of history in order to give you this kind of information. But it is good for you to know that there are people out there who with good evidence that will tell you this could have been X, Y, or Z. So, for example, some people believe that the Gospel according to John was actually written by Lazarus. If you read texts like the disciple whom he loved, and you get to John chapter 11, for example, when John or whoever the author is telling the story about Lazarus and his death and resurrection, he is addressed as the friend he loved. So that's a good hint. Another hint or another school of thought is that the gospel was written by Mary Magdalene, believe it or not. And why is that, Pedro? Well, the first disciple or the first person that meets Jesus after he is dead is Mary Magdalene. And there's a beautiful thing there. I'm not going to go into details, but like I said, I still believe it was John. Although there is evidence for all of these other things, I still believe it was John. Jesus had a very tight circle, 12 disciples. And then within the 12 disciples, he had a group of three, John, Peter, and James. And they were always close. And according to tradition, John was the one who lived the longest. And if you have ever watched the TV series The Chosen, here I go, getting in trouble already. If you have ever watched the TV series The Chosen, you will see that at some point there they depict this idea that John is old and he wants to write down all of the things that happened because he's concerned that people would forget if he doesn't write it down, which is very common in the Jewish tradition. Another thing you got to notice is the Gospel of John, or the Gospel according to John, was originally written in Greek. And the disciples, for example, they didn't speak Greek. And in order to write the Gospel according to John in the structure and the style that it is written, it's very rare. I can assure you, there was no one in the times of Jesus who could have written the Gospel as we have in Greek the way it's written. So this is either a miracle or something extremely intentional that we haven't figured out yet, which I love it. It's a mystery, the mystery of the scriptures. It's beautiful. However, you can also go back and think, well, they were very influenced by the Greeks and by the Romans, so all of this takes place, right? So let's go, the Gospel according to John. And before we go into chapter 1, I want to say one last thing. The Gospel of John is very well structured. Now, we won't have time in these videos to show you the structures, how he counts the days. As he is starting the story of Jesus, he goes on the second day. On the third day, there was a wedding. On the sixth day, there was a festival. On the seventh day, all of these numbers, they play a role. I personally believe that the Gospel according to John is an offending document. It was written literally to destroy the arguments of all the Pharisees at the time of Jesus. If you don't know this, at the time of Jesus, there were two rabbis that were very famous, and they had their own interpretation of the law, and they were pretty much against everything that Jesus was doing. Hence, the Pharisees trying to kill Jesus, trying to persecute Jesus, trying to put Jesus in prison. And I believe that whoever wrote, I'm going with John, whoever wrote this, had an intentional attack on everything Jewish. The festivals, the customs, the habits, the way they walked, the way they talked, the way they ate, everything that they did has a clear distinction, a clear attack in each one of these chapters. And they're all intentional. Now, it's not chronological. You'll see that. As we're reading, you see chapter 3, chapter 4 mentions of things that happened in the future. So again, there's another challenge. When people are reading the Gospel according to John, they go like, I don't understand this. It's because it's not chronological. This is a document written in the past tense. So if we are right, John probably wrote this either in the 60s or 70s or in the 90s, which is very, very, very far. And it's like he's very, very, very old. And some people believe that he wrote before the fall of the temple, the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in the year 70. Some people believe that he wrote after. I won't tell you what I believe because that's polemic. But if you read it carefully, you'll understand where we're going with this. So all of this plays a part here. I also believe that the guy who wrote this John is the same who wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, at least 1st and 2nd. We don't know about the 3rd. And I also believe it's the same John who wrote the book of Revelation. So there's a good authorship here, and the style and everything kind of matches. So as we go through chapters, what I want you to understand is that if this is a document written to destroy and debunk the arguments of the Pharisees and the Jewish people, there must be a reference in everything that is said here to the Jewish festivals and customs and habits, okay? So I'm reading with this background in mind, as if you were sitting in the 1st century, and as we read, you will understand that he is first talking to them, not to us. He talks to them objectively and to us subjectively. That doesn't mean that the gospel according to John is subjective to us. No. I believe the whole New Testament is authoritative. Ooh, that's a difficult word. Authoritative, which means it has authority over my life. The whole New Testament has authority over my life. I believe that the whole Scripture is inspired by God, is breathed out by God, and the whole New Testament has authority in our life. And I'm saying the New Testament because if I say the Old Testament has authority over our life and it is authoritative and prescriptive, then you're going to have to do what the Old Testament says. And we're going to get to that point, but I'm not discarding the Old Testament, and I'm not putting more weight on the New Testament than the Old Testament. I want you to understand this clearly. All I want to say is that the author had a clear intention talking to the Jewish people, and there's going to be very clearly differentiated in the text when we are attacking the festivals, the customs, and everything that they did. So this is the introduction to the Gospel of John. My recommendation is that not only you watch these videos, but read with us every time we're doing this. And if you want to, in our community, you can go into our community. It's just called pedroonpurpose.live/Philippians. If you join our community, I have put more resources there. There's like hours upon hours of research, documents, PDFs, summaries, deep dives, audio documentation. There's a lot there. There's at least 20 hours there. So if you want to nerd it out like I did, that's the place to go, all right? It's all saved there for you. But I hope this will be suffice to you as we start. So we're moving from our introduction to the Gospel according to John, 1st chapter.